Do you like alternate World War II history? Do you like Lord of the Rings? Do you like both of those, but Japan? Well then, the 2007 classic Battalion Wars 2 is right up your alley. And with it being one of my all-time favorite games from my childhood, I decided to play the game once again to share with all of you one of the most underrated games from the Wii era. Created by the British game company Kujo Entertainment, who is widely known for creating such groundbreaking titles such as Dancing with the Stars, while also being involved in a very wide array of other games, ranging from Warhammer 40k, Lord of the Rings, Pokemon, and even Disney titles. But we're getting a little off track here. So, October 29th rolls around and North America sees the release of Battalion Wars 2. Sorry rest of the world, you need to wait till next year, and in the case of Japan, a whole 7 months after. Created as a spiritual successor to the Advance Wars franchise and a sequel to its first iteration on the GameCube, Battalion Wars 2 would release to some pretty impressive ratings, scoring an 8.10 on IGN and a 7.5 on GameSpot, where Joe Dodson would dish out some scathing criticisms, such as still strategy and light and the artificial intelligence is overly simple. And of course, the story is 2. Thank you video game reviewers, you once again showed your mettle. So I've been thinking about how I wanted to structure this video, and I decided that I would very quickly go over the factions and their named characters to make the rundown of the story just go a little bit quicker. And warning, this isn't going to be a massive deep dive, because as much as I'm sure a 2-hour retrospective will be awesome for BW2, I'm certainly not going to be the person to do it. The Solar Empire is the one faction in BW2 when I was growing up that I was never able to put 2 and 2 together. Looking back on it, it was kind of stupid, especially with how its characters have such deep Japanese accents.
The Solar Empire shall be forever shamed by this defeat!
But in my defense, I'm sure Kujo Entertainment most likely did this on purpose, considering Nintendo as a publisher, and an Imperial Japanese era inspiration for them would definitely not fly with the Japanese publisher. Instead, I always thought they were a weirdly done Gondor faction, but one day I was playing Shogun 2 and I was like, you know, the advisor sounds like this one guy that I heard on the Wii. And then I realized the not so hidden truth. So they have 3 characters in the game, which is the most out of any faction. In the prologue, you are commanded by Kuei Len, the Empress of the Solar Empire 200 years ago. While she is dead during the present day events, she pops up again during a later chapter. Her replacement as Empress is Kuei Lu, who is the ruler of the faction during the present day events of the game, and yeah, that's really all I gotta say about her. Last but not least is Admiral Akira, who you'll be following for the majority of the Solar Empire campaign.
The sun rises on the day of my final victory, Pierce. My airways shall orchestrate the fall over your vile nation.
The unit design, as I said before, looks nothing like the country it's inspired by. Instead, they have a futuristic look that corresponds with their ammunition, as they're the only faction to shoot plasma instead of bullets, although this has no change in damage output.
And no, I'm not from Cotton. England is my city.
Unlike the Solar Empire, where the developers had to skirt around some unsavory history, in combination with the development being based in the United Kingdom, led to the Anglo Isles being aggressively British. The most blaring example of this is Colonel Windsor, commander of the naval forces, who was also a comedic stereotype for a British modern major general in every regard. Accent, mustache, name, and all. In comparison to Windsor, Commander Pierce is more youthful while also being in charge of the Air Force, along with being the only character to be the same rank as the player, that of course being the commander. Oddly enough, despite the faction representing the United Kingdom as a whole, their infantry units only have one unit not supporting a Celt, that being the Grunt. The Western frontier is much like the Anglo Isles, as they hit the nail on the head with the obvious influence behind them, in this case being the United States. Led by the freedom-toting and football-loving General Herman, who gets his name from the American Civil War General William Tecumseh Sherman, but his attitude is a parody of the drill instructor from Full Metal Jacket, if the wiki is to be believed. I believe Herman to be more based on Sherman though, due to the light and heavy tanks being called Hermans, which is an obvious nod to the mass-produced American Sherman tanks during World War II. His second in command is Brigadier Betty, who is mostly there to ask questions to progress the story, and besides that, really nothing much else. Fitting for the American faction is how well equipped they are for war, as they're the only faction to have every single unit type possible in the game.
One does not simply walk into Mordor.
The Iron Legion, as a reference in the intro and the Solar Empire portion of the video, is based on Lord of the Rings, more specifically, the forces of Mordor. Its ruler, Lord Farrak, has a clear resemblance to Sauron in both appearance and goals, seeing as both wish to conquer the world through military and suffocating industry. In the prologue, he has his main base of operations in a tower and a desolate land filled with toxic air, ash, and openly flowing lava. His infantry consists of green-skinned units resembling orcs, along with their weaponry being noticeably more primitive as they are crudely made in heavy industry, the polar opposite of the Solar Empire. Compared to the Western frontier, the Iron Legion has the smallest unit count in the game, with absolutely zero navy to speak of, along with missing air transports, anti-air vehicles, and light tanks, giving them a total of only 12 units altogether. Exovania is the direct successor state of the Iron Legion, while also being based on Germany. Therefore, a lot of work was to be done to make sure this faction was disassociated with its real-life World War II counterpart as much as possible. The extent to which this is taken is seen by the faction name, as it's not even German in origin, neither is the inspiration for its leader, Kaiser Vlad. That being said, Kaiser Vlad and his second-in-command Ubel are very clearly German in accent, speech, and uniform. Surprisingly though, not everything is scrubbed of the 1933 to 1945 influence, as many of Vlad's rants are eerily similar to a certain Austrians. But what has to be my favorite German nod is how their symbol is just the Iron Cross with vampire fangs at the bottom. Absolutely genius. The last faction is a combination of two different historical periods for a single nation, with it being Imperial Russia and the Soviet Union. However ironic it is that the USSR faction is run by a monarchy under the Tsars, the Tundrans are probably my favorite faction if only because they are called Reds by Herman, and it's refreshing to see the Soviets get the recognition they deserve for the Second World War in Western media. It is currently run by Marshal Nova, who took power from his deceased father Grigori, who is now a ghost haunting his son and commanding his armies for whatever reason. Another thing that I found ironic is that Grigori has a lot in common with Lenin out of anyone. When he died, his body was put on public display for all the world to see, with the city being named after him, kinda like Leningrad or Stalingrad. Now, the astute of you might notice that Nova isn't actually called Tsar but simply Marshal, and while I'm sure you could theory craft a reason why that is, I think it's just to simply make it easier to distinguish the two from one another. But with that out of the way, let's start the story, chapter by chapter, mission by mission. So before we start going on into the gameplay, I'll be remiss if I didn't at least mention how much of a Herculean task it was to configure my PS4 controller to work for a Wii emulator. So I needed to install and use an application called DS4, and that was whatever, it was simple enough to do. But getting the buttons to be synced up and the motion controls to work was a chore and a half. Luckily I had a stoner along the way to help me, and even if you don't need the tutorial, I kinda recommend you go watch this guy's video. It's pretty funny.
You don't have to ignore what I just did.
This janky setup not only forced me to sit awkwardly like it was my first video game, but the advisor is one of those that just repeats the same voice line every 5 seconds, so she would just not shut the fuck up like at all. Once the kinks were mostly sorted out though, I actually began to play the game, and I witnessed an entire elite battalion of men being taken out in one fell swoop. So I picked up the staff that's supposed to be all powerful and protect me, despite clearly saying to the contrary right before my eyes. This would lead me to going on my own Rambo rampage, defeating the greatest weapons the Iron Legion had to offer, till eventually I was given some men to command after my gun short-circuited, leading them past the black gates and into the tower by our door, where I placed the one staff and called down the hammer.
Yo! Yo, holy shit, he dead! Oh, he dead for sure!
Committing kamikaze for myself and the men that decided to follow me. Absolutely based, Kuju, thank you. After willingly admitting some crucial information to her men, Huilin finds the one staff and throws it into the Siberian waste, never to be found again till the plot once again called for its relevance.
You disrespect yourself and your nation. You are made of stupid.
So chapter 1 starts, and my god is there a lot to talk about in the starting cutscene. The Solar Empire campaign begins with the Western Frontier forces stationed in the area being caught off guard and attacked by the Anglo Isles? Yes, that's right. In this universe, the British were the ones who committed Pearl Harbor. Thank you, Kuju. Absolutely based. But now I present you with the $1 million question. Why are they being attacked by the Solar Empire? Is it 1. They have already pre-existing bad blood? 2. They are attacking to colonize as British people tend to do? 3. There is no explanation given? Or is it 4. Suspicion of rumored superweapons like it is the currently ongoing Iraq war? Thank you, Kuju. Absolutely. But getting past that, we begin our first true mission of the game, where we're tasked with finding scattered troops along the beach and rallying them to retake an airbase under Anglo control. And after my first attempt failed due to a cutscene failing to execute, which prevented me from destroying a bamboo gate, with plasma. I tried again, but this time I got support from flame troops, allowing me to proceed and pick up an anti-air vehicle before the attack on the air base begins. And after taking the base and then defending it for a while, I send the Angles packing with only a semblance of challenge coming from the controls, rather than the admittedly simple AI, which is a common trend in my time playing this game. The second mission has us defending 2 naval batteries on a beach from invading Anglo forces, led by Commander Pierce. And after doing that and then remembering that, oh yeah, the frontier was also attacked, I take the flag at the naval base and send them away with their tail in between their legs.
How dare you! You have stolen my dreams!
And once that is done, I'm tasked with saving the Imperial Palace from being bombed, and no doubt plundered for a museum exhibit, leading me to reach a heavily defended palace which quickly dissolved into that one scene from The Anchorman, where I was completely a fish out of water as once again, my controller was the biggest issue in my way of total victory. The following mission is by all means my favorite one so far, purely because it breaks away from the point A to point B and adds a little spice to it. So Windsor has set up 3 missile stations, which seriously calls into question what technological stage we are at this point, by the way. Once I'm given a recon vehicle via a helicopter, I ride out with the munitions expert and destroy the 3 missile stations around the island, one after another, till they're all destroyed. After that, the mission becomes like any other, and we force the Angles off the island and back to their last stronghold. Finally then comes the 5th and final mission of the campaign, and this time we are introduced to the naval mechanics of the game, which in my opinion are the strongest sections of the game, as they never fail to keep my interest. Our mission is to escort Herman's forces to a landing site and bombard the shoreline, destroying any MG and RPG towers, which allows our air transports to deliver my troops in order to continue the attack uphill and into the last remaining Anglo stronghold in the Solar Empire territory. Akira, after claiming victory, decides to follow the fleeing Anglo troops back to their home, while the following cutscene introduces the Tunjan territory leader Nova and his dead father Grigori, as apparently a general of a foreign nation is able to call up a leader of another and get a military alliance just like that, setting up a Russo-Japanese alliance to invade Britain.
Wolverines!
The chapter starts with Herman leading Betty into a war room and telling her the history when 30 years ago the Tunjan territories attacked the western frontier for a similar reason that the Angles attacked the Solar Empire, a suspected superweapon, because angering a nation that you think has a superweapon is the first idea that comes to anyone's mind. Onto the first mission, which tells the story of when Herman defeated the Reds at the apparently famous last stand at Red Rock. Once again, this mission has a mechanic to make it different from the other point A to point B missions that we've seen so far. This was a timer that marked how much time until the Tunjan Air Force arrives to defeat our forces, and while this timer is not new, what is new is the ability to choose between taking objectives. So I chose the barracks first before heading over to the factory to get some artillery pieces, which by the way makes this game 1,000 times easier, because the AI won't respond to you most of the time when you attack them due to the sheer range that they have. After soaking in the sheer copium from the commies, the next mission has me destroy the Tunjan frigates left out in the open for an attack in a small river, which allows me to use the Air Force mechanic for the first time. But once again, the controls are annoying, especially with the flying units, so once again, I'll be trying my best to avoid them as much as possible while playing. Thankfully, bases respawn units, because I tend to lose my Air Force a lot due to anti-air. Though I wouldn't even need my Air Force, because once again, the artillery is just completely broken. I didn't even need to look at the enemies at all when I destroyed the objectives. Jumping right into the third and final mission of the campaign, where the frontier forces are set to push the Tundrans out of the homeland. It immediately starts with discovering that Kaiser Vlad in Exylvania is searching for the one staff in our land, using the conflict as a distraction. Notably, Herman called them Xers, making Elon Musk a poser. Besides references to modern social slop, we're introduced to the infantry unit, the artillery unit, and the heavy tank, which is exactly what it sounds like. Using them to attack with little trouble, I continued to attack with reckless abandonment, causing what is probably the closest that I came to losing, but even then I still won quite comfortably, ending the 3-mission Western Frontier campaign. The end cutscene for this chapter is only Herman and Betty confirming what we already knew about Exylvania being behind everything. They even reuse the same animation of Vlad playing chess to wrap everything up for this whole Nothing Burger chapter. And trust me when I mean that this whole Western Frontier chapter is, really not that important in the grand scheme of everything. Chapter 3 starts with the first one ended, with Akira beginning his counterattack, joined by Nova on the Anglo Isles. Mission 1 has you command a unit under Pierce in the retaking of the aptly named Clapstead Heath Air Base in Port Hampton, Very British names indeed. Once you take over Clapstead Heath, you gain access to the fighter, which is basically impossible to play on my controller setup, so I definitely will not be using it again, leaving the dogfighting to the AI from now on. At this point, I was 3 hours into the game without much challenge, so I got a little carried away and let my battleships be destroyed, which eventually led to my infantry also dying out, making me lose for the first time at the very end of the level. Great, but getting back on the horse, and this time not ignoring the notification that my battleships were being destroyed, allowed me to use them to clear a path to take the flag at the port, which then started a 2-minute timer where I needed to use my frigates and battleship to destroy an occupied sealand. Owing to a repetitive and predictable planes coming in, it was a simple matter for my units to destroy it, with plenty of time remaining. Fittingly, what I consider to be the first true naval-themed mission is during the Angle Isles campaign. However, it would start on a rough spot as I needed to configure a Wii nunchuck shake to my PS4 controller as I needed it to submerge a submarine. After patching up this issue, I have to say that all in all, this mission is the cream of the crop in my generous opinion. As I said before, naval maps are always fun in BW2, and this one is no exception. Split into 3 sections, the first one has you gathering your fleet together, which includes frigates, subs, and a battleship, and fighting your way to Marychester. Once there, you must defend the port from naval landings by Solar Empire grunts, but instead of the loose conditions being them landing in the first place, you have 2 MG towers which can fight them off, adding a pretty creative second layer to the level. Third section has you escort transports to an island stronghold, and once you landed, you take control of the enemy HQ, ending the mission and sending them on the run.
He's also had the nerve to graffiti Windsor's column.
You what?
Another thing that makes sense to be introduced by the Anglos is the bomber. I get access to it after taking down the Solar anti-air array, and I have to use them to clear a path for the cleaning squad to reach a statue. Despite the controls being awkward along with the bonds having a weird delay, in time I was able to defeat the 4 Tundran battleships and a Solar dreadnought, allowing for the statue to be cleaned and the end of the Solar Tundran alliance, because wasting money on expensive military equipment on petty vandalism isn't what people look for in military alliances. Now comes the final mission of the campaign, where the Solar Empire, without support from home or from the Reds, leaves them open for a final devastating attack. Defending against multiple air attacks allows for some ground troops to be brought in, giving us the firepower to push into the only Anglo map without any ocean to speak of. Before advancing onto the Solar airbase, I get a light tank, bazooka vets, and some prisoners of war from a burned down village, giving me the troops that I needed to overwhelm the Solars and send them off our coasts and back into the ocean. The ending cutscene has Vlad making his first moves by poisoning Akira, and revealing to us that he looks to have started Operation Barbarossa in the middle of winter, a genius and outstanding move no doubt. Also, just saying, this ending to the chapter kind of invalidates the entirety of the previous one, so, you know.
Be careful, Frodo.
Instead of doing an Exylvanian chapter focused on this world's version of Operation Barbarossa, Kuju wisely instead went with a flashback where Vlad frees Ubo from a gulag by using a gas attack, and tells him the history of the Iron Legion as justification for why they are searching for the One Staff. First up is a mission where I must defend what is easily the most heavily guarded position the player gets in the entire game, all in order to wait for the dreaded battle station to be made, and it's kinda like the German Maus tank if it actually worked how it was intended. Once it's unleashed, Kuei Len, and I shit you not, tells us that we're placing too much faith in the already operational Giga tank, while she is currently waiting for most of her army in enemy land at these Tesla charging stations to be recharged. So while the mission plays out how one might expect an army run on solar panels would turn out, she then decides to attack our mining stations in the following mission once she realizes the availability of her army depends on whether or not it's cloudy outside. Striking quick, I reach a defensive position that's been holding the Solars off. Manning it, I fight a pretty hard scuffle that sees me lose my only heavy tank. Despite that, following a bombing run on some gates, I gain access to a barracks after a small skirmish. Then freeing some captured tanks and destroying generators led us to liberate our mining operation with some success, allowing us to claim victory as only one machine was felled. Yet another victory for Big Pollution. The last mission takes place a tad bit before the events of the prologue, as Kuei Len makes a desperate attempt at destroying the Iron Tower. Why it's so important to take down the tower, I really don't know. But as I free 2 artillery pieces, I now start my fight down to the beach, because the Solar invasion plan depends on a series of naval landings on the coast. After forgetting to break out a few grunts from a POW camp, I make it to the beach. Thankfully, I have 2 towers assisting us in the defense, leading to the repulsion of the forces in the beginning of the prologue, which is actually told from the enemy's side in the final cutscene. It also reveals that they found the hiding spot of the One Staff in the Tundran Wastelands. Chapter 5, technically 3 if we're going by the game, but I'm counting the flashbacks, starts off with one member of each country seeing the devastation brought upon the Tundrans, while Betty is filling up Nova for some reason, and Kuei Lu announces the reformation of the Alliance of Nations. The first mission takes place at Gorgisburg, which I assume is this world's Stalingrad, as both are named after leaders, while also being the place where the tide of the war which changed. It plays out to what we have seen many times before. We free POWs, capture a factory and an airbase, call in reinforcements with a helipad, but due to it being a united effort, we also get some frontier units to join our merry band, ending with us saving the mausoleum where Gorgi was buried by being blown up by dynamite. The next mission sees us defend Novigrad, but seeing how the first section of this mission is fully naval combat, it of course is my favorite of this chapter. Using the Tundran fleet headed by the dreadnought TTS Potemkin, I attack the ported Exovanian fleet with overwhelming power. I do it almost uncontested till they bring out their very own dreadnought. Once sunk, Vlad copes with his loss by telling us how the rest of his dreadnought fleet is stationed in the Novigrad caves. So now, alongside recapturing the city, I also need to take out what I guess is the last of their fleet. Thanks, I guess, Vlad? After breaking out multiple troops from their POW camp, I now begin pressing into the city, fighting street to street, which makes it pretty hard to maneuver around, go figure. Reaching the pinnacle of the city and destroying the anti-air allows us to call in a helicopter with the Demo Man. I was expecting a third section to the mission, but surprisingly, it was done with just cutscenes, without me having to do anything. Now comes the second to last mission in the entire game, which its entire meaning is kinda weird story-wise, because at the beginning of the chapter I thought it was pretty clear that they already knew where the staff was, but apparently they're using this machine thing to find its exact location, so maybe the mining Spidey thingy can move around, but also there's this paper that says the mining station was set up already, so it's a little weird, alright? Anyways, besides that, its only protection and main mechanic of this level is to break down this concrete wall with a bombing run. But excuse me if I'm wrong, but could we not just shoot a tank round at it, or run it down with tank treads, instead of having to destroy 4 anti-air towers if time is really of necessity here? But nevertheless, I start the long haul to destroy the 4 anti-air towers, easily getting the first one out of the way before moving on to a POW camp and the second tower, then the third, and eventually the fourth, allowing the bombers to come in. Now with the bombers and freeing a second POW camp, I rush headlong up a hill to a powerful counterattack, destroying my units before deciding to manually play the bombers. Moving in like an idiot, I lose both of my bombers to anti-air, forcing me to use only 4 infantry to finish the level, and to be fair, it went pretty well, till I realized my last bazooka unit was trapped in a cage. Although freeing myself, I now needed to beat 2 anti-air vehicles with just a single bazooka unit. But thankfully, the AI hasn't gotten any smarter. The scary part comes from the Exovanian fleet showing up, and just one battery from them would completely destroy my units, forcing me to redo all of this. Thankfully, they just didn't do anything while I slowly destroyed the machine.
You celebrate prematurely. The location of the staff was received moments ago.
So begins the final mission of the game, and where I found the difficulty of the game wanting so far, I did not think so after this mission. You might not think that's the case when I get to use the most powerful unit in the game, the battle station, but I need to bring the slow-moving hunk of metal a pretty far away, while the Exovanians have 9 in total, all but 1 of which come in pairs. And while I'm not proud to admit it, it took me 3 tries to beat this mission. It starts easy with beating a few heavy tanks, and then comes in 2 battle stations throwing their dick around. After dispatching them and going down the road, you come across 2 frontier heavy tanks being attacked by a battle station. Moving on from that, you find 2 more battle stations and free 2 Solar Empire anti-air vehicles. Then once again treading along to free 2 more frontier tanks from 2 more battle stations. And after that comes the last skirmish in the game, where once again 2 battle stations, among others, guard 3 generators protecting the spider from attack. And after taking down the generators comes the Anglos to bring all the factions together for the final boss fight against the mining spider. The fight itself is pretty easy and is over quickly, but now backed into a corner, Vlad uses the fucking thing and brings down the hammer. But thanks to Pierce, he is forced to head into the underground while everyone else runs away while the solar shot hits. While Vlad and Ubel are stuck under some rubble, the rest of the characters have a parade in Red Square, where Betty flirts with Pierce in front of the guy she was feeling up not too long ago, but at least he got father's recognition, which brings a close to the most underrated game in Wii history, in my opinion. So now that I finished BW2, I just want to let you all know that It's really a good game, and if this interested you at all, I highly recommend you give it a try. As proof for its greatness and ability to withstand the test of time is that it still has a pretty sizable community online. Alright, you have tournaments online, apparently. If you check out the Reddit r/Battalion Wars mod, I know that's asking a lot, it's a Reddit thing, but you'll find a Discord link there, along with a GoFundMe for better modding tools that seems to have reached its goal, as they already closed it. So for my final thoughts about BW2, I think it definitely stands the test of time, and I think I'll easily give it an 8 out of 10. -2, because I think the story is a little iffy here and there, but besides that, gameplay-wise, it's fantastic. Now comes the million-dollar question. Do I think it's going to get a sequel or a remake? Definitely not. And the reason I don't think it's going to get a remake is because I think that it's very much in a Punch-Out situation, where these characters that are based off of national stereotypes, and I don't think that's gonna fly with modern day video games and all that. I don't think people would support that or like that as much as they used to. So if Punch-Out doesn't get a sequel or a remake, don't expect Battalion Wars to get it. So yeah, that's it. Hope you all enjoyed. This took me a while to make, so I appreciate a like and subscribe. Besides that, Paradox Mega Campaign probably going to be starting up again soon. I am going to be streaming, hopefully. I say that a lot, but hopefully I'll be streaming more. I want to play a lot of Tekken. I really want to get into FGC. So yeah, if you like if you like Tekken, come follow me on my Twitch, or maybe I'll stream it here on YouTube as well. I don't know.